Colonel James Jimmy Hastings, retired, settled into seat 24C on United Flight 447 from Denver to Washington, D.C., trying to make his 6'2" frame comfortable in the cramped economy seat. At 71 years old, with white hair, thick glasses, and hands that shook slightly from essential tremor, he knew exactly what he looked like to the other passengers. An old man, fragile, harmless, invisible. The flight attendant barely glanced at him as she checked seat belts. The businessman in 24B sighed heavily when Jimmy sat down, as if annoyed that he'd have to sit next to an elderly person for the next 3 hours. "Excuse me," Jimmy said politely, trying to stow his small carry-on in the overhead bin. His hands trembled as he lifted it, making the task difficult. The businessman didn't offer to help, just kept typing on his laptop, pointedly ignoring the struggle happening inches away. A younger man across the aisle finally stood up. "Here, let me help you, sir." "Thank you, son, appreciate it." Jimmy sat down, buckled his seat belt, and pulled out a worn paperback, a Western novel he'd read 3 times already. He wasn't much for technology. Didn't own a smartphone, didn't understand social media, didn't see the point of most modern gadgets. His daughter, Rebecca, worried about him. Thought he was isolated in his small house in Colorado Springs. Thought he needed to move to an assisted living facility, somewhere with support services and community activities. This trip to D.C. was at her insistence. She'd arranged for him to tour some facilities near her home in Arlington. Jimmy had agreed to come, even though he had no intention of leaving Colorado. Colorado Springs was home. It was close to Peterson Air Force Base, where he'd spent the last decade of his career. Close to the mountains he loved. Close to the memories of his late wife, Margaret, who died 5 years ago. He didn't need assisted living. He needed to be left alone with his books and his memories. "Attention passengers, this is Captain Mitchell speaking," a voice came over the intercom. "We've been cleared for takeoff. Flight time to D.C. will be approximately 3 hours and 15 minutes. Should be smooth flying once we get above this weather system. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." The plane taxied to the runway. Jimmy looked out the window at the gray sky, the snow falling lightly. March in Colorado, unpredictable weather, just like he remembered from his flying days. Not that anyone knew about his flying days. He was just an old man in economy class. The businessman next to him made a phone call just before the doors closed. "Yeah, I'm stuck in coach. Conference didn't spring for business class this time, and I'm sitting next to some old guy who can barely lift his bag. It's going to be a long flight." Jimmy said nothing. He'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. The plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the air. The ascent was smooth, professional. Good pilots, Jimmy thought. You could always tell in the first 30 seconds of flight. They climbed through the clouds and the turbulence started. Nothing serious, just the bumpy ride you get when crossing a weather system. But the businessman next to Jimmy gripped his armrests, knuckles white. "Nervous flyer?" Jimmy asked quietly. "I'm fine," the man snapped. "Just don't like turbulence." "This is nothing. Just some chop from the storm system. Should smooth out in a few minutes." "What are you, a pilot or something?" "Used to be, long time ago." "Yeah, well, things have changed since your day, old man. Planes are more complicated now." Jimmy smiled slightly but didn't respond. Yes, planes had changed, but physics hadn't, and fear was the same in every generation. The turbulence did smooth out, just as Jimmy had predicted. The flight settled into the routine of modern air travel, flight attendants offering drinks, passengers watching movies on seatback screens, the hum of engines providing white noise. Jimmy read his book and tried not to think about the upcoming visit with Rebecca. She meant well, but she didn't understand. He wasn't ready to stop living his life. Wasn't ready to be warehoused somewhere playing bingo and waiting to die. He was still capable, still sharp, still had things to contribute. But nobody saw that when they looked at him. They saw his age, his trembling hands, his thick glasses. They didn't see the man who'd flown combat missions in Vietnam, who'd commanded fighter squadrons, who'd spent 45 years in the Air Force, rising to the rank of full colonel. They didn't see Viper, the call sign he'd earned flying F-4 Phantoms over North Vietnam in 1968. They just saw an old man. About 90 minutes into the flight, Jimmy noticed something odd. The engine's pitch changed slightly. Nothing dramatic, but he'd spent so many years listening to aircraft engines that he could hear the difference. A moment later, the plane banked to the left, not sharply, but more than a routine course correction. The businessman didn't notice, but Jimmy did. Then Captain Mitchell's voice came over the intercom, trying to sound calm, but with an edge of tension underneath. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. We're experiencing a minor technical issue with one of our systems. Nothing to be alarmed about, but as a precaution, we're going to divert to Kansas City. We should be on the ground in about 20 minutes. We apologize for the inconvenience." The cabin erupted in groans and complaints. The businessman next to Jimmy immediately pulled out his phone to check for connecting flights. But Jimmy was listening to the engines again, and he didn't like what he was hearing. The left engine wasn't running at full power, and from the way the plane was handling, subtle things most passengers wouldn't notice. They were compensating for more than just a minor technical issue. Something was wrong. Really wrong. And about to get worse. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with practiced calm, but Jimmy could see the tension in their movements. He'd been around enough emergencies to recognize controlled fear when he saw it. "Excuse me, miss," he said to a passing flight attendant. "What's the actual situation?" She gave him the standard, reassuring smile. "Just a precautionary diversion, sir. Nothing to worry about. I'm a retired Air Force pilot, 45 years of service. I can hear that the left engine isn't running right, and I can feel how the plane's handling. What's really going on?" The flight attendant's smile faltered. She glanced toward the cockpit, then leaned in closer. "Sir, I can't discuss specifics, but the captain has everything under control." "That's not what I asked." She hesitated, then whispered, "Left engine's losing power. They're trying to stabilize it. That's all I know." Jimmy nodded. "Thank you for the honesty." After she moved on, the businessman leaned over. "Did she say the engine's failing? Are we going to crash?" "No, the plane can fly on one engine if necessary. That's what they're designed to do. We'll be fine." "You don't know that. You said you flew, 50 years ago? These are different planes." "Physics is physics. Trust me, we'll be fine." But even as Jimmy said it, he noticed something else. The cabin pressure felt wrong. His ears weren't popping the way they should during descent. Then the oxygen masks dropped from the overhead compartments. Passengers screamed. Several people started crying. A man across the aisle began praying loudly. "Put on your masks," a flight attendant shouted. "Pull them down firmly, place over your nose and mouth, breathe normally." The businessman next to Jimmy fumbled with his mask, hands shaking so badly he couldn't get it on properly. "Here," Jimmy said calmly, despite his own trembling hands. He helped secure the man's mask, then put on his own. The cabin descended into chaos. Crying children, panicking adults, the oxygen masks dangling like jellyfish tentacles. Captain Mitchell's voice came over the intercom, strained now. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a pressurization issue in addition to the engine problem. We're descending to 10,000 feet where you won't need the oxygen masks. Please remain calm and follow all crew instructions." The plane began a rapid descent, not a dive, but faster than a normal descent. Jimmy's stomach lifted slightly, a sensation he remembered from his combat days. He looked out the window. They were over Kansas, judging by the flat terrain below. The weather was clear here, at least. That was something. But he could tell from the plane's behavior that they had multiple problems. The engine issue, the pressurization failure, and something else, a slight drift to the left that suggested hydraulic problems. This was bad, not catastrophic yet, but heading that way. The businessman had pulled off his oxygen mask and was hyperventilating. "We're going to die. Oh God, we're going to die." "We're not going to die," Jimmy said firmly. "The pilots know what they're doing, but you need to calm down, breathe slowly, in through your nose, out through your mouth." "How can you be so calm?" "Because panic doesn't help. Action helps. Right now our action is to stay calm and let the pilots do their job." A flight attendant, the same one Jimmy had spoken to earlier, stopped by their row. "Sir, I told the captain you're a former Air Force pilot. He's asking if you'd be willing to come to the cockpit." The businessman looked shocked. "What, why?" Jimmy was already unbuckling. "Lead the way." He followed the flight attendant forward, holding onto seat backs for balance as the plane continued its rapid descent. Other passengers watched him pass. The old man they'd ignored earlier, now walking toward the cockpit with purpose. The flight attendant knocked on the cockpit door, spoke into the intercom, and it swung open. Inside, Captain Mitchell and his first officer were working frantically. Alarms were beeping. Warning lights flashed across the instrument panel. "Sir, I'm Captain Dale Mitchell. My first officer is Sarah Chen. We're in serious trouble here." Jimmy took in the situation with a glance. The instrument panel told the story: left engine at 30% power and dropping, hydraulic pressure in the yellow, cabin pressure warning, and multiple other cautions. "What can I do to help?" Jimmy asked. "I don't know yet. Just wanted someone with aviation experience up here in case," Mitchell trailed off, in case they didn't make it. "What's your flight time, Captain?" 15,000 hours, all on civilian aircraft. "I'm Colonel James Hastings, retired, 45 years Air Force, 25,000 hours, mostly fighters but some transport. Talk to me." Mitchell pointed to the displays. "Left engines failing, cause unknown. We've tried restart procedures, no good. Then we lost cabin pressure. Now we're getting hydraulic warnings. It's like everything's cascading." Jimmy studied the instruments. It took him a moment to orient himself. This Boeing 737 was very different from the F-4 Phantoms and F-15 Eagles he'd flown, but the basics were the same. "What's your training for multiple system failures?" he asked. "We practice single failures, maybe two, but this many?" Mitchell shook his head. "I've never seen anything like this." "I have," Jimmy said quietly. "Different aircraft, different era, but the principle's the same. You prioritize what absolutely must work to get this plane on the ground. Flight controls, obviously, at least partial hydraulics, and enough engine power to maintain airspeed. Then forget everything else. Focus on those three things. Let the warnings beep. Let the lights flash. You can't fix it all in the air. Just keep her flying and get her on the ground." Mitchell looked at him. "Kansas City is 40 miles out, but I'm not sure we can make it. We're losing altitude faster than I'd like, and with these hydraulics, landing is going to be rough." "Any closer airports?" First Officer Chen spoke up. "There's a regional airport in Lawrence, Kansas, 22 miles northeast. Single runway, but it's long enough for us." "Can you make Lawrence?" Jimmy asked Mitchell. "I think so, maybe. But sir, with all respect, I don't know you. I don't know your background beyond what you've said. I can't make decisions based on advice from a passenger." "You're right," Jimmy said. "You're the pilot in command. This is your aircraft, your call. I'm just offering perspective from someone who's dealt with emergencies before." Mitchell made his decision. "Sarah, get me Lawrence Airport. Declare an emergency. Tell them we're coming in hot with multiple system failures." Chen got on the radio. "Lawrence Tower, United 447, declaring emergency. Multiple system failures, requesting immediate landing clearance." The tower responded, but then another voice cut in on the emergency frequency, a voice that made Jimmy's blood run cold. "United 447, this is Viper. Say your position and status." Everyone in the cockpit froze. That call sign, Viper. It was his call sign from 50 years ago. "But how?" "United 447, this is Viper," the voice repeated on the emergency frequency. "I'm inbound to Lawrence from the north in an F-15. I have you visual. Confirm you're declaring emergency." Captain Mitchell grabbed the radio. "Viper, affirmative. We have multiple system failures. Left engine failing, hydraulic problems, pressurization issues. We're trying to make Lawrence." "Copy that, 447. I'm establishing escort position off your right wing. I'll be your eyes and talk you through this." Jimmy's mind was reeling. Someone using his old call sign, why would? Then the voice came again, clearer this time, and Jimmy recognized it. "United 447, be advised you have visible damage to your left engine cowling. I can see what looks like a separation. Also, your left aileron is not moving with your control inputs. You've got bigger problems than you think." First Officer Chen turned to Jimmy. "Sir, did he just say his call sign is Viper, isn't that?" "My old call sign," Jimmy said, "from Vietnam." Mitchell shot him a look. "You're Viper, the original Viper." "I was, but that was 50 years ago. Who's using it now?" Chen was already checking something on her tablet. "Sir, There's only one pilot currently assigned the call sign Viper in the Air Force. Colonel Marcus Hastings, F-15 Squadron Commander out of Peterson Air Force Base, Jimmy finished. My son. The cockpit went silent except for the alarms. Marcus's voice came over the radio again. United 447, I'm going to do a close pass to assess your damage. Hold your current heading. Moments later, an F-15 Strike Eagle flashed past the right side of the airliner, close enough that Jimmy could see the pilot's helmet. The fighter pulled up and came alongside, matching the Boeing's speed. United 447, this is Viper. Your left engine is coming apart. I can see missing cowling panels and what looks like a turbine blade failure. You need to shut it down completely before it causes more damage. Mitchell looked at Jimmy. Your son. Yes, we don't talk much. Well, he's talking now, and he knows his stuff. Should I shut down the left engine? Jimmy studied the instruments. He's right. That engine's going to grenade if you don't shut it down. Better to shut it down controlled than have it explode. Mitchell nodded to Chen. Shut it down. Chen went through the engine shutdown procedure. The left engine wound down to silence. The plane immediately yawed to the left, and Mitchell had to fight the controls to keep it level. Hydraulics are getting worse, Chen said. We're losing authority on the flight controls. Marcus's voice. United 447, Viper, I see your control surface issues. You're going to need to use asymmetric thrust to steer. When you land, it's going to be fast and rough. Lawrence Tower is clearing all traffic. They're rolling emergency equipment. Mitchell keyed his microphone. Viper, I've got a former Air Force pilot in the cockpit with me. Colonel James Hastings says he's your... My father, Marcus interrupted. There was a pause. Is he helping you? Yes, he's been invaluable. Another pause. Good, Dad knows his stuff. Listen to him. Then more quietly, almost to himself. Of course he's on the plane that's falling apart. Of course he is. Jimmy took the spare headset that Chen offered him. Marcus, this is your dad. Hey, Pop's been a while. 3 years. Yeah, not ideal circumstances for a reunion. Never are. Despite the crisis, Jimmy felt a familiar mix of emotions. Pride in his son, who'd followed him into the Air Force and earned the same call sign. And pain from the distance between them. A distance that had grown after Margaret's death, when Jimmy had withdrawn into himself and Marcus had responded with anger. Marcus, tell me straight, can we make this landing? Honestly, it's going to be close. You're losing altitude fast. You've got maybe 10 minutes of controlled flight left before those hydraulics give out completely. Lawrence is 8 minutes away if you push it. And if the hydraulics fail completely, then it becomes a glider with very limited control. Dad, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is bad. The odds aren't great. Jimmy looked at Mitchell. Captain, you heard him. What do you think? I think we push for Lawrence and pray. We're too far from Kansas City now anyway. He keyed the radio. Viper, we're committed to Lawrence. Talk us through this. For the next 8 minutes, Marcus stayed on their wing, calling out their altitude, their airspeed, their rate of descent. He gave Mitchell constant updates on what he could see from outside. Control surface movements, fluid leaks, structural damage. Jimmy found himself acting as a bridge between his son and the airline crew, translating Marcus's fighter-pilot terminology into terms Mitchell could understand, and explaining the Boeing systems to Marcus. Father and son, working together for the first time in years. You're at 2,000 feet, Marcus called. Runway is 5 miles ahead. You're high and fast, but you can make it. Start your descent. Mitchell pushed the nose down. The plane picked up speed, too much speed. Can't slow down, he said. Flaps are barely responding. We're going to land hot. How hot? Jimmy asked. 200 knots, maybe more. Normal landing speed is 140. This is going to be rough. Marcus, Lawrence Tower is advising the runway is 9,000 feet. You'll have enough room if you can keep it on the pavement. Big if, Chen muttered. 1,000 feet, Marcus called. Runway dead ahead, you're lined up, looking good. They dropped out of the clouds. The runway appeared below, emergency vehicles lined up alongside it, lights flashing. 500 feet, you're fast but stable, you can do this. Mitchell's hands were white-knuckled on the controls. Sweat ran down his face. 200 feet, 50, flare now. Mitchell pulled back on the controls. The plane's nose came up slightly, but not enough. They hit hard, harder than any commercial landing should be. The impact threw everyone forward against their restraints. The plane bounced back into the air, 20 feet up. "Stay with it," Jimmy shouted. "Don't let it balloon." Mitchell pushed the nose down. They hit again, even harder. The landing gear screamed. Something in the fuselage made a sound like a gunshot, metal failing, rivets popping. But they were down. Mitchell stood on the brakes. The plane shuddered, skidding. The right main gear blew out. They lurched to the right. "Keep it straight," Jimmy said. "Don't let it ground loop." Mitchell fought the controls, using the nose-wheel steering and differential braking. The plane fishtailed down the runway, trailing sparks and smoke from the blown tire. They were going too fast. The end of the runway was coming up. "We're not going to stop in time," Chen said. The Boeing 737 hurtled down the runway at Lawrence Municipal Airport, trailing smoke and sparks, with Captain Mitchell fighting for control, and the end of the pavement rushing toward them at nearly 100 miles per hour. "Reverse thrust on the right engine," Jimmy shouted. "Max reverse." Mitchell slammed the right engine into full reverse. The asymmetric thrust tried to spin the plane, but it also helped slow them. The aircraft shuddered violently. 70 knots, 60, 50. The end of the runway was 100 yards away, then 50. 40 knots, 30. The plane lurched onto the overrun, the safety area beyond the runway, and skidded through grass and dirt. 20 knots, 10. They stopped with the nose wheel 10 feet from a drainage ditch. For a moment, nobody moved. The cockpit was silent except for the blaring alarms and the sound of the right engine winding down. Then Mitchell's hands started shaking. "We're down, we're actually down." Jimmy exhaled slowly. "You did good, Captain. Textbook emergency landing." "Textbook? That was barely controlled chaos." "That's what emergency landings are. But you got everyone on the ground alive. That's what matters." Chen was already on the radio. "Lawrence Tower, United 447 is stopped. We're evacuating passengers now." Emergency vehicles surrounded the plane within seconds. Firefighters sprayed foam on the smoking left engine. Ambulances stood ready. The cabin door opened, and evacuation slides deployed. Jimmy could hear flight attendants shouting instructions to passengers in the cabin. Marcus's voice came over the radio. "United 447, this is Viper. Beautiful job getting her down. I'm coming around to land. Dad, you better wait for me before you disappear." "I'll be here, son." 5 minutes later, after all the passengers and crew had evacuated safely via the slides, Jimmy stood on the tarmac near the crippled aircraft. His knees were shaky from the adrenaline crash, his hands trembling worse than usual. Captain Mitchell approached him, still in his uniform, his hair disheveled. "Colonel Hastings, I owe you my life. We all do. I don't know if I could have handled that without your help." "You would have managed just fine, Captain. You're a good pilot. You stayed calm, made sound decisions, and got everyone home. That's all that matters." "Still, thank you, and I'm sorry." "Sorry for what?" "For the way people treated you on that plane. I saw you struggling with your bag at boarding, saw people ignoring you. We all assumed you were just an old man who couldn't take care of himself." Jimmy smiled. "I am an old man, that part was accurate, but age doesn't mean useless, it just means experienced." An F-15 roared overhead, then circled to land. Marcus was coming in. First Officer Chen joined them. "Sir, the passengers are asking about you. They want to know who the old man from economy was who helped save them." "Tell them I'm nobody special, just a passenger who happened to have some relevant experience." "Colonel, you're a hero." "No, the heroes are Captain Mitchell and you for keeping your cool. The flight attendants for evacuating everyone safely. Your son for providing escort and guidance. I just offered some advice." But Chen was looking at her phone, scrolling through something. "Sir, someone recorded the radio traffic between the plane and your son. They're posting it on social media. You're about to be famous whether you like it or not." The F-15 touched down smoothly and taxied toward them. It parked nearby and the canopy opened. A figure in a flight suit and helmet climbed out. Colonel Marcus Hastings walked toward them, removing his helmet. He was 52 years old, with gray at his temples and his father's eyes. He looked exhausted. Father and son stood facing each other for a long moment. Then Marcus saluted. "Colonel Hastings, good to see you, sir." Jimmy returned the salute. Colonel Hastings, same to you. They dropped the salutes, and the formality fell away. Dad, what the hell were you doing on that plane? Flying to D.C., your sister wants me to look at assisted living facilities. Assisted living? You just helped save 200 people from a plane crash. You don't need assisted living. Tell that to Rebecca. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. When I heard United 447 was in trouble when I scrambled to provide escort, I had no idea you were on board. Then when the captain said Colonel James Hastings was in the cockpit, I couldn't believe it. Small world. Dad, why didn't you tell me you were flying through Kansas today? I would have picked you up, we could have talked. We haven't talked in 3 years, Marcus. I didn't think you'd want to hear from me. That's not fair. You're the one who shut me out after Mom died. You're the one who wouldn't answer calls, wouldn't visit. Jimmy looked down. I know I was grieving and I handled it badly. I pushed everyone away, including you and your sister. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry too. I should have tried harder, should have understood you needed space. They stood there awkwardly, 2 men who'd spent careers giving orders but didn't know how to talk to each other. An ambulance pulled up. A paramedic got out. Sirs, we need to check everyone who was on that plane, make sure there are no injuries. I'm fine, Jimmy said. With respect, sir, you just survived an emergency landing. You could have injuries you're not aware of. It'll just take a few minutes. Marcus put a hand on his father's shoulder. Let them check you out, Dad, and while they do, we need to talk. Really talk. Not as pilots, not as father and son who don't know how to communicate, just talk. Jimmy nodded, okay. 2 hours later, after medical checks and initial debriefings, Jimmy and Marcus sat in a small office at the Lawrence airport, drinking terrible coffee and finally having the conversation they should have had 3 years ago. I've been angry at you, Marcus said, for withdrawing, for not letting me help you after Mom died. I know, and I don't blame you. I was drowning in grief and I couldn't see past it. Your mother was my whole world for 48 years. When she died, I didn't know how to be a person anymore. You could have leaned on your family. I should have, but I'm a stubborn old man who was taught to handle things myself. It's not an excuse, just an explanation. Marcus sighed. Rebecca told me she's trying to get you into assisted living. Is that what you want? Hell no, I want to stay in my house. I want to live on my own terms for as long as I can. But your sister thinks I'm not capable anymore. She sees my trembling hands, sees that I don't use a computer, and assumes I need to be taken care of. After what you did today, anyone who thinks you're not capable is an idiot. The tremor is essential tremor. It's not Parkinson's, it's not dementia, it's just my hands shake. I can still think. I can still function. I just need people to give me a chance. Marcus pulled out his phone. I'm calling Rebecca right now. She needs to know what happened today. The call to Rebecca lasted 20 minutes. She was simultaneously relieved that her father was safe, furious that he'd been in danger, and stunned by what he'd done. So you see, Marcus told her, Dad doesn't need assisted living. He needs to keep living his life. Rebecca's voice came through the speaker. But Marcus, he's alone in that house. What if something happens? What if he falls or has a medical emergency? Then I'll move closer, Marcus said, looking at his father. There's an F-15 squadron at Buckley Air Force Base just an hour from Dad's place. I've been offered the command position. I turned it down because I didn't want to leave Peterson, but maybe it's time for a change. Jimmy stared at his son. You do that? Dad, you're 71. Mom's gone. Rebecca's in D.C. I've been at Peterson for 8 years. It's time I was closer to you. Not to take care of you, you don't need that, but to be family again. Rebecca's voice softened. Okay, I can work with that, but Dad, you have to promise to stay connected. Call us more. Let us be part of your life. I promise, Jimmy said. I'm done isolating myself. The news coverage of United Flight 447's emergency landing dominated the headlines for days. The story of the mystery passenger who'd helped save the plane caught national attention. When reporters discovered that the passenger was Colonel James Hastings, a decorated Vietnam veteran and the father of the F-15 pilot who'd provided escort, the story went viral. Forgotten hero saves flight, read one headline. They ignored him until he saved their lives, read another. Jimmy gave one interview, at Marcus's urging. I'm not a hero, he told the reporter. I'm a man who had relevant experience and offered to help. Captain Mitchell and his crew are the heroes. They kept their calm under impossible circumstances and got everyone down safely. But the passengers said you were ignored before the emergency, that people treated you like you were helpless. People make assumptions based on age. They see gray hair and trembling hands and assume incompetence. It's human nature, but it's also wrong. Older people have decades of experience and knowledge. We're not obsolete, we're resources that aren't being used. The interview struck a chord. Within weeks, advocacy groups for older Americans were using Jimmy's story as an example of age discrimination. Companies started reviewing their attitudes toward older employees and customers. And Jimmy found himself with unexpected opportunities. Boeing asked him to consult on crew emergency training. Several airlines wanted him to develop programs for dealing with multiple system failures. The Air Force asked him to teach a course on crisis decision-making. Seems like retirement is over, Rebecca told him during a video call. He'd finally agreed to learn how to use a tablet so they could video chat. Seems like it, but this time it's on my terms. Marcus had indeed taken the position at Buckley. He visited his father every weekend. They went hiking in the mountains, had dinner together, slowly rebuilt the relationship they'd neglected. 6 months after the emergency landing, there was a ceremony at Peterson Air Force Base. Captain Mitchell and the crew of United 447 were honored for their handling of the emergency. And Jimmy was presented with the Air Force Distinguished Public Service Medal, the highest honor the Air Force could give a civilian. General Patricia Hayes, who'd flown with Jimmy in the 1980s, presented the award. Colonel James Hastings represents the very best of the Air Force family, she said. Active duty, retired, or civilian, we are all connected by service. And when crisis comes, we answer the call, regardless of age or status. Colonel Hastings answered that call at 71 years old and helped save 200 lives. That's the definition of service. After the ceremony, Jimmy stood with Marcus, Rebecca, and his 3 grandchildren, looking at the medal in its presentation case. "Grandpa," his 9-year-old grandson asked, "were you really just sitting in economy class and nobody knew you were famous?" "I'm not famous, buddy. I'm just a guy who's lived a long time and learned a few things." "But you saved all those people." "I helped, there's a difference." Rebecca hugged him. "I'm sorry, Dad, for pushing the assisted living thing, for not seeing that you were still capable of so much. You were worried about me, I understand, but I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I've got my son nearby, my family's closer, and apparently I've got a second career as a consultant." Marcus put his arm around his father's shoulders. "You know what the best part of this whole story is?" "What's that?" "For 3 years, we barely talked. We were both too stubborn, too hurt. Then you get on a plane that's falling apart, I happen to be flying nearby, and we end up saving 200 people together. If that's not the universe telling us to stop being idiots and be family again, I don't know what is." Jimmy smiled. "Your mother would say it was her up in heaven arranging things." "Probably was. She never could stand it when we fought." They stood together, 3 generations of Hastings family, at the air base where Jimmy had spent so many years of his career. He thought about the passengers on Flight 447 who'd ignored him, dismissed him, saw only an old man struggling with his luggage. He thought about the businessman who'd complained about sitting next to him. He thought about how invisibility can be its own kind of isolation. But he also thought about Captain Mitchell's professionalism, about Marcus's voice on the radio, about the way crisis can bring out the best in people. They'd ignored the silent passenger in 24C, until the pilot heard the call sign Viper on the radio, and everything changed. Until the old man became the expert. Until age became wisdom instead of weakness. Jimmy Hastings had spent 3 years in isolation, convincing himself he had nothing left to offer. One emergency flight had proved him wrong. And in saving others, he'd saved himself. Not from death, he'd never been in danger of that. But from the slow fade of becoming invisible, irrelevant, forgotten. He was none of those things. He was a father, a grandfather, a pilot, a hero. He was 71 years old and just getting started. And the trembling hands that people saw as weakness, they were steady when they needed to be. Just like the man himself. Always steady when it mattered. Always ready to serve. Always Viper. Forever,